working with the government, you're working in a role where such issues often pop up, and what kind of angle to take, what is the right connotation to use in terms of the comms elements. When traditional media often report something which is fake, they face sometimes the wrath through camera or other organizations, but often it comes to the fact that how the government is authenticating something as a verifiable piece of information which spreads out. So what are your comments on this? How do you think, what is it that government is doing in terms of regulating it, how to control the spread of fake news?
Well, fake news are not something new. So we at NACTA, we were looking at the role of fake news in creating a security situation for the country. For example, the terror groups would use disinformation campaigns to not only recruit more terrorists and get the funding. So at NACTA, we launched Chaucus app where people could report the content. Then we had another application which was SurfSafe. So through SurfSafe, you could, it was actually meant to build a crawler. First, the idea was to build a crawler where it could take down the hate material and the content which is leading to terrorism. For example, use of black flags by the ISIL, and then the seal of Prophet Muhammad. So they basically combined the hadiths of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam towards the end of time. So it's a very smart maneuver where the terrorists actually use the ideology which is widespread, which has widespread acceptance, and then they make narratives around it. So when you look at this COVID-19 and the spread of fake news, I think the world was shocked by the event itself. So the response from the authorities who were supposed to give the correct information, it is basically the responsibility of the government to bring forward the facts. The more delay when it happens, and the more misinformation and disinformation campaigns are launched. So it's the first responsibility is that of the government, and then the civil society and the people on how they accept or absorb that information. Not only their level of literacy, but also their level of immunity, how much immunity they have to such information. So when I was working at NACTA, and even now when I'm advising UNODC on the strategic communication side to create resilient societies who are not easily influenced by the narratives of the terrorist organizations. So there we have to design, programs where you create youth who are resilient. And because they are the majority of your population, they are 65% of Pakistan, and look at the age numbers. So if you look at the numbers, we are targeting more in terms of terrorism. But when you look at COVID-19, it engages the whole country, any campaign. So how to ensure that your youth is part of your, how do you say, campaign to ensure that fake news are not spread. So you need that. I agree with Dr. Lisa. She said that there are countries who have cyber army where they have the government, and Twitter where almost 6.9 million fake news were blocked, but they were not blocked in a way where people could not access them. People were still accessing that information, the fake news, and it was spreading more. So for us who are working in the security domain, I think the impact of fake news is far more dangerous and serious when it comes to terrorism and extremism. I will address the issue of COVID-19 later, where it has further affected the fault lines in the country.
Sure. Thank you, Humaira. So let's ask the same thing from you, Dr. Umar. In your experiences, you are very much involved in behavioral sciences. What nudging does it do for people? Why are they so convinced to share? And what is the way to regulate? Can nudging be a way to help curb the spread of fake news?
Sure. So when thanks a lot for having me in this conversation. When I was thinking about this, I thought, well, what does behavioral science say about things? And I thought they nicely fit in three different categories. So one is, well, why would we share this stuff? So I'm not talking about the creators, but I'm talking about those. Why would we want to share any content that might not be true? And the second is, well, why would we then believe in it as well, right? And then the third is, well, what is there something more innovative behavioral insight solutions that have been tested out? And I think during this conversation, I can talk about that. So maybe start with the first thing, which is why would we, at the end of the day, the fake news, there's just two things. One is more people spreading, but then also people end up believing the news, right? Well, that's probably why it is a problem. And comes the basic question, which is why would we believe in something like this? And it goes to just how our brain is wired. And it's going with this idea of this dual processing system that we have. So think of them as like two characters that we have in our brain. A really simple way to explain that is, if we ask people what's 17 times 33, and nothing really comes to mind except that, oh yeah, it's a multiplication question. If I have enough time, I will be able to come up with an answer. But then here's another one, which is, if I tell you all that, and it's a really famous problem, a bat and a ball costs 110 rupees, and the bat costs 100 rupees more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? And for many of you, the answer that pops up is 10 rupees, right? Which is the wrong answer. In fact, I actually asked a national sample of Pakistan, around 2,000 odd nationally representative sample, exactly this question. 95% of them got it wrong. They said 10 rupees. Right? It's a really simple thing, but it illustrates this point about there's this one part of our brain which is acting very fast, unconsciously. We don't really have control over it. That operates almost 95% of our time. And then there's this other part, which is more conscious, more deliberative. That's what we call the slow system, the more thinking system. But that's only operating 5% of the time. And when it comes down to believing something, we think that people are alert, which means they're using their slow system, also known as system 2, and that's why they would take it in and stuff. But that's not the case. It's this fast system that's operating. And for this fast system, the story is really simple. One, it loves stories. Second, as long as the story makes sense, irrespective of the quality and quantity of data, it's believable. So this fast system, which is operating most of our time, anything that is believable, it sort of makes sense to us. We're going to say, yeah, makes. Now, the way it should happen is that the slow system should monitor. It should keep a check and say, hold on, just pause, wait, look, right? Which is what a lot of our solutions are like, right? We give training and we are saying, how can we pause something, etc. But that is lazy. It doesn't want to work. And that's one big reason why we would end up just taking it in, because yeah, it makes sense, right? I mean, and hence we go with it. The second thing is around this, we call it the confirmation bias. It's just our tendency to look out for information which already goes with the existing beliefs that we have. And this is where social media exacerbates the problem just based on its algorithms. Why? Because you engage with things that you're interested in, and the more you engage, the more the similar information is presented to you. So you get into this vicious cycle in which you keep on going extreme and extreme. And there's a lot of work done on group polarization, where as you hear and see more information which sort of fits what you already believe, you then keep on believing it more and more, right? And you keep on. And the last one on this, which is I would believe, is who is the messenger, right? Just COVID specific, I've asked it in 3 different national surveys now. Government is the least trusted source when it comes to COVID measures, right? Who's number 1? Doctors are number 1, right? We would take a message, we would believe a message based on who we would trust. And what determines that? It determines whether that person is a source of authority or not, or do I take that as a source of authority or not? Do I like that person or not? are they similar to me or not? These are the things that would influence the power of that messenger and the power of that message, and that would then make me, it would determine whether I would believe in it or not. So I'll just stop here onto this bit, and maybe later I'll share about why we would share stuff as well. But in terms of why we would believe, I would say it's just the way brain is wired. We love stories. As long as something makes sense, why not? We only seek information that confirms our beliefs and who the messenger is.
Okay. So, Fasi, if someone is sharing because they believe, they want to believe, they tend to believe, it's a knee-jerk reaction, as Umar says, instead of a more cognitive approach to it. And we've seen how the panelists have shared their views about how best it can be regulated. Is banning anything in Pakistan a norm? What can't be regulated, ban it? Is that the right approach? Or what else are those approaches to regulate it? So let's hear your views on that.
I think banning wouldn't necessarily make the problem go away. One of the problems that we have is that we also suspect who will be banned and for what reason, and whether there's a fair possibility for appeal, because these things tend to start getting some degree of mission creep. They start for one purpose and then encompass into a whole lot of dissent in other areas as well. I think in the case of coronavirus disinformation, to a degree, one of the problems is that politics has caught up to social media, where politics is now, a decade ago, social media had already begun. We've seen the rise of far-right nationalists all over the world, and one of the key things that they've done is undermine expertise or people within the old guard and structures. And so when you're looking to have something like a public health crisis, that's an automatic area where you will also start to exhibit a lot of doubt at a time where it's incredibly necessary. I also think that part of the problem in the COVID case is some of it's natural. If you see the evolution of information that's come out from the WHO, it's changed over time as they knew more about the disease. Obviously, things that we've known about pandemics since 1919 still apply, but for a lot of people that is contentious, because hand washing and maybe wearing a mask isn't as big an issue, but it's also correlated to a lot of economic issues which impact people directly. So there's also an incentive to disbelieve if some of the economic measures will be painful to them personally. I also think that one of the major things that we've seen from social media firms, where actually more needs to be done rather than the government get involved, is that as they've grown historically, they use the free speech narrative, which was really appealing, but it was also maybe made to prevent getting some degree of regulation. And now we're pretty clear that some degree of regulation is absolutely necessary, because where you have issues that can result in violence, or in this case, death or infection, these are things that can be controlled to a certain degree, which may not be that controversial. And these are things that at least these firms, if they were willing to self-regulate more, we'd have less of a problem than we do now. I also think one more thing is that part of the reason that you've got so much disinformation, some of it we've seen nation states are working against each other. Dr. Schritz has talked about that. Even the US is putting an emphasis on the source of the virus. And a lot of nation states are getting involved in something like this. But when the virus came out, we heard this thing that this is a disease that doesn't discriminate. Very quickly, we found out that it does discriminate. It affects the poor more, people who can't socially distance. And also it discriminates in the sense where there is polarization already existing in the country, or there is severe inequities. This is also playing that up. So racism against Muslims in India was not created by the coronavirus, but it became just one of the excuses to latch onto. The same is the case for sectarian issues in Pakistan that were ascribed to the coronavirus. So in some ways, I just think that some of what we're seeing with the coronavirus isn't a coronavirus problem. It's our long-standing structural issues that are just being raised by this.